Boa noite. Ele viveu e lutou por liberdade num país e num tempo onde isso era impossível. Sofreu segregação em ônibus, escolas, hospitais e até igrejas. Era obrigado a entrar nos prédios por uma porta especial e não podia usar o mesmo elevador. Tudo isso por um motivo: não ser branco. Preso, acusado de sabotagem, foi julgado, condenado e passou 12 anos em uma prisão de segurança máxima. E hoje está aqui no centro do Roda Viva. Nosso convidado é o professor sul-africano Maharaj, um dos fundadores do movimento anti-apartheid ao lado de Nelson Mandela. Ele ajudou o líder sul-africano a redemocratizar o país. O sul-africano Maharaj começou na vida política no início da década de 50. Morou na Inglaterra e retornou a seu país para lutar pela liberdade, que só viu depois de ficar preso e ver companheiros morrerem nas ruas e na prisão. Maharaj era discriminado num país onde a segregação de raças era oficial. Maharaj tem 72 anos e passou os últimos 50 envolvido na luta política contra o regime racista da África do Sul. Um dos fundadores do movimento anti-apartheid, foi preso nos anos 60 junto com outros militantes, incluindo o amigo e companheiro de luta Nelson Mandela, cuja biografia mais recente teve Maharaj como um dos consultores editoriais. Mandela, retrato autorizado, não é um livro e nem uma história convencional. A edição volumosa e graficamente bem tratada é repleta de ilustrações. O texto se baseia nos relatos de 60 entrevistados de todo o mundo, amigos, familiares, personalidades internacionais que tiveram alguma ligação com Mandela e que, em seus depoimentos, firmam a imagem do líder sul-africano como um dos homens de maior importância na história humana do século XX. De estudante de direito a primeiro presidente negro da África do Sul, Nelson Mandela tem sua história pessoal profundamente marcada por um dos mais odiosos regimes racistas já vistos no mundo. Colônia holandesa e depois inglesa, a África do Sul adotou no final da década de 40 uma política oficial de segregação racial, tornando ainda mais humilhante a vida da maioria negra, 75% da população do país, que ficou mais de 3 séculos sob dominação europeia. Com o apartheid, os casamentos interraciais foram proibidos, os negros não podiam votar e a segregação se tornou ostensiva em ônibus, escolas, hospitais e lugares públicos, delimitados para uso exclusivo da minoria branca. Foram mais de 40 anos de racismo absoluto, que veio abaixo no final da década de 80 por conta das pressões internacionais e, principalmente, do movimento negro que teve em Mandela seu mais expressivo líder. Pacifista de início e que depois decidiu recorrer à luta armada, passando 27 anos na prisão por causa disso, Nelson Mandela dominou a cena política após ser libertado em 1990. Ganhou o Prêmio Nobel da Paz em 1993 e ganhou também a primeira eleição multirracial do país, governando a África do Sul de 1994 a 1999. Maharaj participou desse governo como ministro dos Transportes e vivenciou com Mandela o desafio que a queda do apartheid deixou ao movimento de libertação. Governar o país negro mais rico do mundo, por seus diamantes, enfrentar uma desigualdade social que concentra 90% da riqueza nacional nas mãos da minoria branca e combater um dos piores índices de infecção e morte que a AIDS tem causado no planeta. Fora da vida pública desde 2005, Nelson Mandela tem se dedicado a causas sociais e de direitos humanos, especialmente através de sua fundação. Maharaj também se afastou da vida política e hoje é professor na Universidade de Bennington, em Vermont, nos Estados Unidos. Para entrevistar o professor e escritor Maharaj, nós convidamos Renato Rovai, editor da revista Fórum, Christian Lobauer, cientista político do GACINT, Grupo de Análise de Conjuntura Internacional da USP, Maria Amélia Rocha, jornalista, Kátia Mello, editora assistente de comportamento da revista Isto É, Leila Leite Hernandes, escritora e professora doutora de História da África da Universidade de São Paulo, e Vicente Adorno, editor-chefe de documentários da TV Cultura e comentarista internacional da Rádio Cultura FM. Também temos a participação do cartunista Paulo Caruso, registrando com seus desenhos os momentos e os flagrantes do programa. Roda Viva, você sabe, é transmitido em rede nacional de televisão para todo o Brasil. Como o programa de hoje está sendo gravado, não é possível a participação imediata dos telespectadores, mas você pode, aliás, peço que faça isso, mandar a sua pergunta, a sua crítica, a sua sugestão, sua observação sobre o programa pela internet. A página do programa é a seguinte, www.tvcultura.com.br/Roda Viva. E aí você manda o seu e-mail. Boa noite, professor.
Good evening and thank you very much for your kind words.
Eu queria perguntar o seguinte, a África do Sul hoje é um país onde não há racismo?
Not at all. There is still racism. something that arose over a period of more than 350 years cannot be removed in 13 years. Because racism is a matter of the mindset and how people think and how they react. So it remains a problem, and it remains a problem how to bring about real equality. In our Constitution, we have equality, it's written. We have no longer the right to discriminate against people, be it on race, color, religion, culture, language.
Aqui no Brasil também. Aqui no Brasil também a Constituição diz isso. Agora, o fato de um setor dos negros na África do Sul ter avançado na direção de uma condição financeira melhor, de surgir uma classe média negra, começa a estabelecer a desigualdade e a discriminação entre os negros também?
I think it is a very important thing that's happening because it is laying the basis for everybody to have equal opportunity. So the growth of the black middle class is very important, but it's not the end of the story. It's the start of the story.
Eu gostaria de falar um pouquinho sobre o livro que vai ser lançado aqui, sobre o seguinte: quando se faz um livro dessa dimensão, com um personagem da dimensão do Mandela, levanta-se todos os lados da história, tanto a nobreza que está estampada no livro, quanto as fraquezas desse ser humano. Eu queria que o senhor falasse se o senhor descobriu fraquezas em Mandela e quais são elas.
Oh, many, George. First of all, the way he harassed me when I was in prison. Secondly, I think one of his very close colleagues, Ahmed Kathrada, says in the book that Mandela can be a very vain man. And he did have a record as a ladies' man too. So, he is very human, like you and me. The difference is that as a leader, he is one of those few leaders who does not hide or pretend that he has no weaknesses and no faults.
Professor, o que mais me impressiona na história de privações e de coisas notáveis que o presidente Mandela passou pela vida é o fato dele ser um dos únicos líderes políticos da história moderna e das democracias modernas que abdicou de uma reeleição, vamos dizer assim. Ele completou um mandato e se despediu da vida pública, que é uma coisa absolutamente inusitada. Não há outro exemplo que eu conheça de grande proporção como a dele. Nem um Konrad Adenauer, que começou a governar a Alemanha Federal com 73 anos e foi até os 87, em 4 mandatos parlamentares, nem Churchill, que depois da vitória da Segunda Guerra Mundial poderia ter encerrado a carreira, fez questão de voltar, mas Mandela não. Ele conseguiu, depois de todos esses anos de privação, tantos anos preso, completou o primeiro mandato e se desprendeu, quer dizer, deu um salto espiritual, ele largou as pequenices da política, vamos dizer assim. O que é que, o senhor que viveu tão perto de Mandela, o que é que esse homem tem que o fez capaz de abdicar dessa condição de homem público, quase que poderia ter um mandato permanente, vamos dizer assim?
I think your question arises because in the modern world, leaders do not understand one simple proposition. And that is that once you are in a position of power, when you give it up, you become more powerful. Most politicians think that if they've got power, they're now the president, that the way to keep power and remain powerful is to keep on staying in that office. But when you look at Mandela, and you look at the influence he has all over the world, it became much larger once he retired as president. I think that's a very important lesson for all of us in the world, to understand how to wear power gracefully and how to give it up, because giving it up makes you more influential in our world. On a light-hearted side, I would say maybe we were lucky. He was 77 years old when he became president, so he had no choice.
Professor, o senhor também não abdicou, de certa forma, de uma carreira política um pouco mais longa ou um pouco mais significativa, que o senhor foi ministro e depois o senhor se retirou, voltou a atividade acadêmica, e hoje o senhor até mora nos Estados Unidos, de certa forma o senhor está um pouco apartado da realidade da África do Sul. O senhor também acha que o senhor tem um poder diferente por causa disso?
Yes, I do. I teach part-time only for 7 weeks, twice a year in Bennington. The rest I stay in South Africa. But I think I'm able to talk with young people at Bennington College. I'm able to grow young through them. And I think at the same time, young people are more happy to talk with me because I try to understand them. What is it that they like? What music they like? What social activities they like, which have changed from our generation. And so I think they give me more respect through that than if I was just Minister of Transport. I, of course, gave up. I retired. I wanted to retire many times from 1990 because I think that there is another side to the struggle of all humankind. And that is we have assumed that through that struggle you will bring a better life for everybody. But in the process of our struggle, I realized I did not know my children or my family. And I thought it's time to repair that damage.
Sempre tem preço a pagar.
Yes, it applies today. Because we cannot be making a revolution if our own children cannot benefit from it. Why should they carry and transmit the knowledge and our values to their children and to generations to come?
Professor, o senhor foi um dos homens mais torturados do regime apartheid. E o senhor chegou lá jovem e com muita raiva dentro da prisão. E a convivência com Nelson Mandela parece que mudou a sua maneira de pensar. Eu gostaria que o senhor falasse sobre essa raiva, onde foi parar esse ódio e como é que vocês lidavam com esse sentimento.
Indeed, I was an angry young man when I went to prison. I was arrested when I was 29 years old, and I was tortured for 2 months, and I was brought to court for 4 months later. By that time, I had already got gray hairs in 4 months. So I got to prison very angry, and I wanted to fight, because to me as a young man, it was more important to fight and die than to carry on living that way. What did Mandela teach me? I used to get into arguments with the warders, prison warders, every day. And we would end up where I would say something wrong and swear them, and then they would charge me for abusing them. And Mandela called me one day, and he said to me, "You are correct to stand up against that injustice, but how you do it is wrong. You're giving the enemy the chance to punish you. So when you take up the issue, stop, count 10, calm down, pick your words. Now you will be able to hurt that man more, but he won't be able to charge you." I don't know whether that's a good lesson, but it tells me something about Mandela, that he pays a lot of attention to listening to the other side before he decides how to act. And I think that's part of the world in which we live. We say we want people to talk, but we don't listen to what they are saying. We only want them to hear what we are saying.
Mas não há uma diferença, não há digamos, um limite muito pequeno entre essa atitude que permite, digamos, ferir mais aquele que é o seu adversário, sem agir de maneira violenta, e a pura e simples colaboração, ou, digamos assim, a subserviência. Porque essa é a grande discussão. Toda vez que a gente se enfrenta um inimigo maior do que a gente, o raciocínio que a gente tem que fazer é, ok, até onde pode ir a possibilidade de jogar e até quando é necessário realmente se confrontar de maneira radical e até perder. Como é que se estabelece esse limite?
I think you're raising a very, very important question. There is no clear line separating collaboration from a principled standpoint. You only have your own inner resources to carry you through. And you have to ask certain questions from yourself all the time. You always have to doubt that you are doing what you are doing is right. You have to question yourself in your own mind. And you have to ask, is this conduct helping the struggle, helping my comrades, or is my conduct going to help the enemy? I don't know the answer. I only know that when we were told to walk, to go to work in a column, 30 of us prisoners, and they said, you must run to work. Mandela was in the middle, and he quietly whispered to us, he said, just walk straight and walk slowly. And quietly he walked through and came to the front of the queue. And he began to walk slowly. So all of us began to walk slowly. We went to work, we worked, but we went with our dignity intact. So how you make that distinction, there is no answer, there is no textbook. Just there is no textbook that tells you how to answer when you are under torture. And I will not blame anybody if they are tortured and they speak and they give information. But I will also honor those who refuse to speak.
Professor, eu queria que se o senhor pudesse pontuar assim, qual a importância do Mandela do ponto de vista de conseguir segurar esse ódio que se estabelecia do ponto de vista negro e branco na África do Sul, principalmente até 1994, e hoje, qual a importância dele ainda para que essa bomba relógio, que parece que está, assim, de certa forma, em estado de compasso, não leve a sociedade sul-africana a algumas explosões em dados momentos?
I think what Mandela understands is that while he was a leader of the black oppressed people, who were the majority in South Africa, he understood that when he became the leader of the country, he needed to unite diverse people into a single nation, to have a sense of being South African. So he is about nation building, not about destroying nations. I think that holds him together and guides him in the way he reacts. I know there have been times that I have gone to him and I said, Madiba, this is our way we address him, his clan name, Madiba, why is it that you went and visited the architect of apartheid's widow and had a cup of tea with her? And his answer was, Mac, you know, if you people want to keep on fighting, you carry on fighting, but I'm more interested in building a nation. And I want to spend my last years in life bringing people together. So I think that's the clue to the man. Maybe I should add on the word anger. Many people ask me, why are we not bitter? And I say that is the wrong word. The correct word is, if you did not react to injustice, you would not be human. If we saw a child there, 3 years old, being physically assaulted by the mother, if you didn't do something to stop her from doing that, you wouldn't be human. So anger is correct. But if you want to act and to bring benefit, you must control your anger. And you must be able to act by saying, this is what I'm going to do because I want to get the result B. So I need to find a way to talk to that mother, not to humiliate her, but to teach her that that child is going to carry her values into the kind of society we're going to make tomorrow. So I think that's the Mandela, that for me was a very important part and a privilege for me. So when I look at 12 years in prison, I know many people say, oh, sorry. I said, no, please don't feel sorry. I am a very privileged man that I was able to spend 12 years with Walter Sisulu, with Nelson Mandela, and to learn from them.
Professor, Vamos fazer um rápido intervalo, voltamos um instante com Roda Viva, que hoje tem na plateia Larissa Marques, jornalista, Alexandre Pinto, empresário, Daniela Fernandes, jornalista. A história de Mandela foi escrita à mão num mosaico de cartas, bilhetes e trechos de seu diário durante os 27 anos em que esteve preso. No livro Mandela, Retrato Autorizado, estão reunidos alguns desses manuscritos que, por iniciativa de Maharaj, foram guardados e mais tarde organizados de forma a permitir que Mandela escrevesse sua autobiografia. Longo Caminho para a Liberdade é a história da vida e da ação política de Mandela, contada por ele mesmo, com a percepção e a vivência de quem transformou a própria vida numa lição de justiça, moral e dignidade. No mundo todo, o livro foi considerado uma das mais importantes memórias a respeito de um líder de um momento histórico que instigou a humanidade a repensar seus destinos. Queria entender o seguinte, quem já passou por uma prisão de segurança máxima sabe como é difícil algum preso fazer qualquer coisa que não seja vigiada estritamente, né? Muito mais escrever uma obra completa e transportar isso para fora da prisão. Eu sei que o senhor já respondeu essa pergunta N vezes, mas para os brasileiros eu queria que o senhor explicasse como é que isso foi possível.
Well, once you go to prison, you become a criminal in your mind. And you learn how to, you have to say to, because we were political freedom fighters, we did not accept the authority of the system. And they said, you're not allowed news, we smuggled news. They said, you're not allowed to write things for your biography or poetry, we found ways to do it. And in this particular case, Mandela would write every night 10 to 15 pages in his handwriting. The next day it would be given to me and I would write it into small handwriting on an A4 sheet of paper. And then we would hide the original, give it to Katrada and Sisulu to read. So he wouldn't see it again. But altogether it became 60 sheets of paper, 2 sides. And when I typed it out in London, it became 600 pages typed A4. We took it and we hid it into the files. We made a file with ordinary cardboard paper. And we put these things in between the sheets and stitched them together and pasted them together and made it look like a professional file. The only thing that I didn't learn to do was how to forge money. Otherwise, I'd be a very rich man.
Agora, houve pouco de sorte nesse caso, na medida em que o senhor, pelo que eu li, saiu da prisão com esse material debaixo do braço e ninguém o revistou, ou estou enganado?
I had applied for permission to study, so I had my study books, which were in a cardboard box, and in that box was this file with study material. And I was shifted from prison to prison. I think I went to 6 prisons on my way out, kept in total solitary confinement, and the material was searched regularly, but they didn't find it. I suppose it was the times also. This was 1976, after the uprising.
Sí.
And wherever I went, the prisons were full of young people who were rising in rebellion. And they had enough work to do to guard those young people. And they said, look at this old man, he's finished, let him go.
Professor, gostaria de lhe fazer uma pergunta no seguinte sentido. Nós sabemos que esta política de segregação, ela foi mais do que uma política. Ela é uma política, mas ela também é um processo. Então, na verdade, esse apartheid vai aumentando gradativamente no passar dos anos. Ela tem uma ideologia, né, assentada numa forma específica dos brancos pensarem, que valoriza a sua etnia, a sua língua, as suas crenças, né, num Deus que separaria brancos e negros. Mas esse não foi o único ator político, histórico, das vidas de todos os senhores. Ou seja, houve Congresso Nacional, houve Congresso Indiano, Congresso dos Mestiços, houve uma participação importante do Partido Comunista, do qual o senhor fez parte, e nesse sentido, nas suas vidas, no âmbito do processo histórico, houve avanços e recuos. Acho sim que muitos dos senhores não ficaram raivosos, mas mais do que raiva tiveram ódio, como numa declaração muito explícita que o Mandela faz disso. Também a política oscilou entre uma política menos violenta, com o exercício das armas e da violência física, e uma intolerância mais amena, sempre uma intolerância positiva. Nesse processo histórico, portanto, vários personagens, as igrejas têm um papel muito importante na África do Sul e na África Meridional, de uma forma geral. Então, eu quero saber qual a sua importância nesse processo. O que foi feito um livro, mas o que se conversou para se fazer o livro? Eu queria um pouco que o senhor colocasse esses outros companheiros que também foram líderes, embora não tenham se tornado o mito que Mandela se tornou.
Yeah, I think that what we have inherited in the world, and this is not to put blame on anybody, the Chinese used to call any foreigner a barbarian. So this question of racism must be understood at its core value, why it remains so strong in the world. It is because it denies to other human beings their humanity. And this was a particular feature that went with the slavery and the slave trade that took place in Africa, because we denied them a history. We denied them that they are ordinary human beings. And that's the worst form of insult, which we are still living with. All over the world, you look, whenever there is conflict and emotions are raised, you see how they begin to look at each other as superior and inferior. So the challenge of living in a multicultural world and respecting every religion, every language, and every culture is a challenge for this century. And what we're doing in South Africa, I cannot say is the final answer. I can only say we have contributed for mankind walking one step forward. What does it say about my colleagues? I think all of them, inside the struggle, in the prisons, in the torture chambers, even those, I say, who talked under torture, they taught us something more. Because to value human life is, I think, the greatest value that you can have as a human being. The second lesson, that we think we should call a particular people racist. So we look at them and we say they're racist. We don't realize, or we say they are inferior because they're black. We don't realize that the black person's identity is created by the way the other person sees him. So if your identity is created from the way I see you, then I have an extra responsibility not to see you in a way that diminishes your humanity. So those are the basic rules for me in this world. Let us never ask as a people for anything that we are not prepared to grant to any other people. If we could do that, we have laid a new rule for international relations.
Nesse sentido,
o senhor falou há pouco do desprendimento que Nelson Mandela teve. Eu queria retomar esse aspecto. Nós temos um péssimo exemplo do contrário, que é o de Robert Mugabe no Zimbábue. E a gente tem também, no momento, uma crise muito séria na República Democrática do Congo. Por que esses outros países não têm a mesma consistência política, digamos assim, que a África do Sul vem demonstrando?
One very special thing about South Africa was that apartheid was condemned by the whole world as institutionalized racism. Even the United Nations condemned it. All over the world, even when we were imprisoned, we would read about how people are demonstrating in New Zealand against a South African rugby team, how people are demonstrating in the United States. So we grew up with a huge sense of debt to the whole world. And we grew up with respect for the world because we realized that it was not alone, that we alone that won. Now today, we're grappling with the problems of Zimbabwe. The condemnation, everybody is hesitant in Africa. How do they condemn each other? How do they move forward? And I think it's wrong, because I think there is one thing to say, this is our principle. You, Mr. Mugabe, are not respecting the human rights of your own people. But from there we have to ask the question, how do we help the Zimbabweans to bring change? In the Congo, I'm proud that South Africa called all the parties from the Congo and kept them at a conference in South Africa, which we paid for, to keep them talking, to come to an agreement for the elections that have been held now. And right now, the former vice president, who was leading a part of the rebels, is taken refuge in the South African embassy compound in Kinshasa. So, you ask me how and why. I'm not here to judge, but I'm here to say, how should we act? And I think that in my own country, I'm not proud of the way we are acting on Mugabe, but I'm very proud of the way we acted on Congo. So we have to find a way forward. And we have to find a way forward realizing that democracy alone is not the answer to a better life for people and for equality. The world's rules must change. Today, we cannot export our sugar to the United States because it's protected. Because in France, they give a bigger subsidy to a cow than we give to ourselves as our annual wage. Those rules must change. And it'll only change if countries like Brazil, with your powerful economy, countries like India, with their powerful economy, countries like China, stand together and say, let's have equal and free and fair trade.
Mas a África do Sul sempre teve papel importante para o bem e para o mal na política regional africana. Em relação a Angola, em relação a Moçambique, em relação ao próprio Congo. E agora substituiu a Organização da Unidade Africana a Unidade Africana, né, que pretendia, ou pelo menos tem como objetivo, atuar mais de uma forma mais combativa nesses problemas que surgem na África. O senhor acha que isso é viável ou ainda estamos num momento que é preciso ainda a liderança da África do Sul, dos seus líderes, do senhor, do Mandela, do Mbeki, entrando nesses acordos para esse período de transição longo das outras Áfricas?
I think one important thing that has emerged in Africa is what we call the African Peer Review Group, where former leaders come together and go to country by country and assess their record and put their report. I think that's a positive thing, that your fellow peers judge you. I think there's a weakness in it, because after judging you, what are you going to do to stop them from behaving like that? And Mugabe comes as an immediate example. So we are searching our way, and we need to do it by standing together. I'm not saying that we have found the answers. I'm only saying that the freedom of South Africa led us to do things in a different way. And we are hoping that others will take what we did and do it better. I am not there to say to anybody, do not fight with arms for your national rights. I can't say that. But I can say one thing. Always be ready to negotiate a settlement if the opportunity arises. Because one thing we need in this world, we need a world where conflict is resolved without war.
Kátia Mello tem uma pergunta.
Eu queria justamente falar sobre isso, sobre o pegar em armas, né? Quer dizer, vocês lutaram, o Mandela, inclusive, em um dos momentos, ele dizia que só não renunciaria à luta armada. Quer dizer, não é essa a ideia de um pacifista. Qual foi a importância disso, dentro das negociações e dentro do processo para se desmantelar o regime?
I think it is a mistake to think that when people are fighting each other with arms, that the solution is first that they must renounce violence. They must have gone to violence for a very, very special reason. And you and I may not like the reason, but generally it is because there is an oppressive state. So Mandela refused to renounce violence. And he said, why are you demanding this? Because the violence starts from the apartheid system. So he said, let's not argue about that. Let's agree that what we are doing now is going to destroy our country and the future of our children, your children and my children. So therefore it is important to sit down and start talking. The giving up of violence will come as we start talking. And I think that's a major problem in the world today, where we often say it's a precondition that you must lay down your arms. As a freedom fighter, I would never lay down my arms when it looks like I'm surrendering.
Inclusive, ele foi muito criticado por ter relações, queria que o senhor comentasse também, com Yasser Arafat e o Gaddafi da Líbia.
Yes, and he said, I'm not going to allow the world, especially the Western world, the United States, whose governments never supported us, to now say who should be my friend and who shouldn't be. He says, look, the West went to war, the Second World War. You were allies with Stalin. And you telling me today who's going to be my ally and who's not going to be?
Allies eles se aliaram também com Saddam Hussein durante muito tempo. E depois enforcaram ele.
Exactly. And precisely because Mandela took that stand, he was able to help Libya resolve the Lockerbie crisis and persuade Gaddafi to hand over the so-called Lockerbie bombers for trial at The Hague. Because he kept the lines open. And I think the lesson for me there is that in all our areas of our life, within our families, within our nation, when you have conflict, and there will be conflict, do not go so far as to close the door. If I see a snake in this room, and it's a dangerous snake, and I have no weapon, what must I do? I must try to persuade that snake to go there so that it can hide away and go out. So I must leave the door open. I mustn't shut the door open and fight that snake because I'm going to die. So that's a simple lesson in life for me.
Professor, eu queria retomar um pouco esse debate sobre o poder continental da África do Sul hoje, no continente, né? Hoje, a África do Sul detém 50% do produto interno bruto da região subsaariana, que é a parte sul da África, e 20% do total do continente. Quer dizer, ela tem um poder econômico fantástico e, de alguma forma, tem destruído algumas economias locais. Por exemplo, no Moçambique, o Moçambique hoje é absolutamente desindustrializado, em boa medida porque é vizinho da África do Sul. Como o senhor imagina que o país vai ter que se relacionar com esse dado e de que forma que ele pode se relacionar de forma solidária com esse tamanho que tem do ponto de vista regional? É possível que a África se torne um país subimperialista? O senhor vê esse risco?
I cannot say it was not impossible. It is possible. Because we live in an economy which is a mixed economy, which has state participation and private sector participation, and therefore they can plunder the rest of Africa. That's the theoretical possibility. What is the practice? The practice, again, is that when we became free, one of the first things we did, and Mandela did, was to begin to go around the world and thank them for their help. And we have said to our people, at the moment, we do not want border control. We would like to open up our borders. And people are saying we are doing the wrong thing. We have more than 30% unemployment. And they say, therefore, you are allowing the foreigners to come and take our job. And we are saying, you cannot hate each other. You must understand that we became free because Mozambique, Zambia, gave us a home. Botswana gave us a home to struggle from. And we owe it to stand together. But the larger question is, even though South Africa is an important economy, on the world it is nothing. It's a little tiny speck. Unless we build an economy of Southern Africa as a region, we will not have a say in the councils of the world. So what are we doing? We're trying, we have a customs union so that everybody can have a say in it. In Mozambique, I personally helped when I was minister to build the Mozambique corridor and to transfer assistance to Maputo Harbor, which is in Mozambique, and shift some of our shipping from Durban to Maputo to say that is nearer for our industry. It'll make the transport costs cheaper. So we need to work helping each other rather than to work by plundering each other. You know, it's one thing when you are climbing a ladder and two of you are on a ladder and you are at the same step in each ladder and you lean over and pull this man down and you think you've gone higher. No, you haven't gone higher. You must climb that ladder upwards.
Professor, vamos fazer mais um rápido intervalo e voltamos em instantes com Roda Viva, que hoje é acompanhado na plateia por Eduardo Duarte, estudante de jornalismo, William Jacobini, engenheiro, Fernando Stabile, advogado, e Eric Hall, fotógrafo e estudante. Professor, logo no início do programa eu fiz uma afirmação que depois eu me dei conta que eu fiz uma afirmação sem saber se ela é verdadeira. Eu disse que o senhor era segregado em todos os lugares da África do Sul e o senhor não é negro, o senhor é indiano de origem. Tá certo? Então eu queria perguntar em primeiro lugar se é verdade isso, quer dizer, se havia o mesmo tipo de segregação para indianos e negros, se havia distinção nesse tipo de discriminação, e mais do que isso, como é que era o cotidiano de alguém que vivia na África do Sul do apartheid, porque o que a gente tem de noção é apenas e tão somente aquilo que a mídia publica, desde os filmes até os próprios livros que contam a história, mas não a vida real. Como é que era isso e se havia essa distinção?
What was alarmingly criminal about apartheid was that it took all black people and discriminated against them because they were not white. And then it took the black people and it separated between African people, people of mixed blood, people of Indian origin. And later it took the black people and began to separate them on the basis of their ethnicity and their language. But between black, colored, of mixed blood, and Indian, it created, they lived in separate areas. Sometimes they did the same job, but the colored and Indian will be given a better wage. When I was in prison with Mandela and 30 others, the majority were African. We were all given the same porridge in the morning for breakfast, corn porridge. Mandela and the others who were African were given 1 teaspoon of sugar. The coloreds and the people of Indian origin were given 1 tablespoon of sugar, and you were not allowed to share it. If you shared it, you were breaking a prison law. So that is how refined it was in terms of its inhumanity. And sometimes you cannot believe that a fellow human being can think like that. So race and race discrimination affected African, colored, and Indian. It decided where you stayed, which school you went to, which hospital you ended up in, and even which grave you were buried in. And they had to be separate. But it distinguished, that teaspoon of sugar was to prevent us from uniting, was to create a sense that we hate each other and fear each other. And for me, the big lesson of that is never, never may encourage people to fear each other, because fear will make you do the wrong things.
Professor, o senhor acredita que existe a possibilidade de senhor ver ainda mundo sem racismo?
If I didn't, I'd be prepared to go back to prison. No, I have to believe in that. I have to believe in that because I believe that what makes us human is not our own selfishness. It's our ability to reach out to the other. I become human by the way I treat you and the way I treat nature. And when I become human, everybody else around me also becomes human. So I have great faith. I understand the historical roots of racism, the historical roots of intolerance. But I believe that our humanity is defined by higher values than the need for war and of killing each other.
A propósito dessa questão ainda, o Rapin Hood, que é um rapper, colaborador aqui do programa Metrópolis da TV Cultura, faz uma pergunta para o senhor. Ele diz o seguinte:
salve, salve toda a rapa da TV Cultura, programa Roda Viva. Eu gostaria de saber, Maharaj, aqui no Brasil, a gente vive um racismo velado, é um lugar onde alguns dizem que não existe racismo, mas na verdade o Brasil é um país racista. Eu gostaria de saber de você, como você vê, anos depois do fim do apartheid, o racismo na África do Sul e no mundo.
I think that we have only begun to lay the conditions for addressing this problem of racism. It's not been addressed anywhere in the world satisfactorily. It is there even in South Africa, it is there in the United States, it's there in Britain, it's there in Germany where they say no Turkish labor. So wherever you go in the world, it's there. The question about it is that you cannot remove it completely unless you have created a situation of economic opportunity and equality. As long as there is poverty and hunger, there'll be place to generate that and make one person fear the other because I want a job and I don't want you to get a job because it'll rob me of a job. So we've got to realize that this is not a problem that is going to be sorted out in a few years. It's a problem that we've got to address in our homes, in our families, in our workplace, in our schools, in our sports clubs, and in politics. Law alone will not solve this problem because we are talking of a change of behavior. We're talking about realizing that if you make other people better, it makes you better. That's the problem. So we are far from solving it, but we have identified the problem, and that's a step forward. And I think even in Brazil, you need to be able to talk about it in a constructive way, rather than let it hide under the carpet. Bring it out from under the carpet and let people discuss it without having to fight. Let us talk about what is good for all of us and how, if a Brazilian who is discriminated, if that group of people were able to become doctors, lawyers, engineers, how it's going to be better for all Brazilians because you get bigger resources.
Pois é, mas é justamente esse aspecto que eu queria levantar, professor, porque o senhor lutou junto com Nelson Mandela, dedicou a sua vida a combater um sistema explícito de apartheid social e racial. No Brasil, a gente tem enorme dificuldade de lidar com esse tema, porque a gente não sabe muito bem, não tem uma definição muito clara do que acontece aqui. Tem gente que acha que tem gente que acha que não tem. A verdade é que existe um racismo subliminar, e a consequência disso é que existe o acesso aos recursos e as posições nas universidades, nas empresas, etc., acabam sendo direcionadas indiretamente às comunidades mais brancas, vamos dizer assim. Então, o que acontece? Esse governo decidiu partir para uma política de determinação de cotas raciais. E isso também gera um enorme debate, porque se na África do Sul, por exemplo, havia, de alguma maneira, era menos complicado definir quem era o quê, no Brasil isso fica bem mais difícil. Caberá, na verdade, o indivíduo dizer se ele é negro, amarelo, azul ou verde. E é isso que complica demais, porque a vaga na universidade é para as minorias raciais. E, ao que me parece, eu estou plenamente de acordo com o senhor, que a conversa deve se lidar em torno das oportunidades. E o que o senhor pode trazer como opinião da experiência sul-africana dessa ideia de cotas para minorias raciais nas universidades?
I think quotas and what they call affirmative action has emerged in the world as an instrument to partly help redressing that imbalance. I think in South Africa we've done fantastically on the question of non-sexism. The African National Congress started by saying that in its candidate list for parliament there'll have to be 1/3 women. We've achieved that. It is now saying there should be 50% women. So it is taking that process forward. In the private sector, more and more women, and still too few, are becoming CEOs of companies, are becoming professors, are becoming vice chancellors of universities, superintendents of hospitals, but still too few. But I'm saying that the quota system there has helped. In other cases, the quota system may help for a little while and then it becomes a brake. It holds back further progress. Why do I say that? For example, we have an important duty to build unity as a sense of nationhood in South Africa. But because apartheid treated the African at the bottom, the colored and the Indian there, and the whites on top, now the question has become who should be given opportunities. And if you start making fine quotas, you end up by getting them to fear each other. So you've got to test. And maybe I'm wrong. I just have a view that in a society where there is democracy, let's by public dialogue agree which is the most vulnerable minority in our community. And let's agree on that by dialogue. And then every few years we'll ask them simple questions. Are you full of hope or are you pessimistic? And if that minority group says, I still have hope, it means you're doing the right thing. But if it says, I'm pessimistic, then you know you're doing it wrong. Take the lowest of the low and use that as a test. Don't ask the majority, which is now in power. Because if we ask the majority, they will say we're doing well. So maybe that's part of the problem. You need a dialogue to determine and agree who is the minority of a minority in your society. And let us agree to test whether what we are doing is building hope or building despair. Because we don't know. We're walking a journey where we have to learn from each other. And most important, we will learn from our mistakes. I believe that you study history not for what to do, but what not to do.
Professor, eu queria saber
tem outra coisa que o Brasil acho que está compartilhando com a África do Sul nesse momento. Recentemente, uma pesquisa de opinião diz que hoje o brasileiro tem muito mais medo da violência urbana do que de perder o emprego. A África do Sul também tem um problema parecido. Como vocês estão tentando lidar com isso?
Eu queria acrescentar a pergunta do Vicente, que é justamente sobre esse tema, que existe esse legado, quer dizer, aqui vivemos também cultura da violência e na África do Sul também. Nós temos o legado da ditadura dentro das prisões, a tortura, o sistema, e eu queria que o senhor comentasse isso, inclusive como é que isso está sendo resolvido lá.
Well, I think that part of the problem is the way you see me. Because of what I have been through, torture, imprisonment, everything, you are assuming that I'm not traumatized. You are assuming that there are no scars inside me. You are assuming there's no scars in Mandela. I don't believe it's true. I believe that we are living in a traumatized society, white and black, adults and children. And when you live with trauma, the greatest potential for violence exists in that society. We are, in South Africa, in my view, in a state of denial about our own trauma. When children have grown up at 8 years of age, seeing children being shot by the police every day, when children have to fight with sticks and stones, when children have to see their mother starve and die without food because she's giving her children the last bit of food, what happens to their psyche? What happens to their determination of what is right and what is wrong? So I'm saying we need to address this question with a larger dialogue, because we need to address not just what the law should say and what the police should do, but what each of us should do. The other day, my neighbor's alarm went off, and I heard it, and I got up to go and check, and my wife said, "Don't go, because those robbers may be armed and they may shoot on you." I myself made a commitment on the 27th of April 1994, when the elections were over, because my children had seen me bearing arms. I took them and I took the weapons and I said, "Today we have cast our vote. Now I'm able to say that my biggest dream has become true," and I took the weapons and I threw them down a dam. And still people tell me, in this violence you need a weapon. I have made my personal resolution. I don't need it. So I didn't go to my neighbor's help. And you can't remove crime if you cannot stand and be your brother's keeper. It's part of the change, but we start by saying we are traumatized, we are affected, but we'd like to pretend that we are perfect. We're not. You can't go through 60 days of torture, 12 years of imprisonment, and say to yourself, and be separated from your wife and your children. Your children don't see you for years when they're tiny. You can't go through that without traumas and scars in each of us. And that's why we live like that. When Mandela says he wants to do things for his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren, I say to him, isn't it enough you've done for the country? But I understand. He feels guilty that he was not there for his children. So we live with guilt if we deny. But if we create the conditions to talk about it, we will begin to find the ways to address it.
Ficou a segunda parte da pergunta, que é mais, digamos, específica, que é o seguinte: no Brasil é institucionalizada a tortura aos presos comuns hoje em dia. Isso é uma regra. Há exceções, ao contrário do que talvez fosse razoável de se pensar. Eu pergunto se na África do Sul isso acontece também e como que se combate esse tipo de... ou até mesmo como se encara isso, porque aqui há quem diga que isso aí não é um desrespeito aos direitos humanos, porque presos e bandidos não são humanos.
Firstly, I received torture, and I've been a commander who captured people and said, hey, this one has got information. So I handed him to security, get information from him. I've never received useful information through torture. And I don't believe it helps anywhere. But it is part of power, and it's part of the nature of force and violence in society, that you begin to think that by the use of torture you're going to advance your cause. In South Africa today, there are many reports that in a free South Africa, our police have been found to assault a prisoner or a person arrested. We have set up a mechanism to investigate the police. I think it is an important mechanism, but I don't think it's the end of the story, because we are living in a society of inequality. We are living in a society where opportunities are scarce, and we are living in a society which encourages people to stand on top of other people and think that they are therefore better. So I agree. The problem remains. The biggest danger is to then become inhuman and say, oh, but that's part of nature. That's not part of nature. Because when you stand on another human being's shoulder, you are making yourself a lesser person. You are diminishing your humanity.
Ok. Vamos para mais um rápido intervalo e voltamos daqui a pouco com a entrevista desta noite, que também é acompanhada em nossa plateia por Cláudia Worms Tadei, produtora cultural, Gerson Luiz Morelli, professor universitário, Valentine Moreno, produtora cultural, e Priscila Costa, estudante de rádio e TV. Professor, há cientistas que dizem que um passo importante para eliminar o racismo seria extinguir o conceito de raça e substituí-lo pelo conceito de espécie humana. O senhor acha que isso ajuda?
Yes, I think at one level in science there is only one species, and that's the human race. But I think that society creates social constructs, and racism is part of that social construct. And those constructs are made sometimes to understand society, and other times they become instruments of power, exercise of power. Will it change matters if we got rid of the term? I'm not sure. Because still, the persons will be discriminated against. And you'll have to create a new term to say, yes, this one is discriminated. I think racism has acquired a reputation which nobody wants to say, I am racist. So maybe that's an advance. But so I'm not so sure just creating the concept of the human race eliminates the problem.
Mas a ideia dos cientistas, eu não compartilho necessariamente disso, é que não se poderia usar a expressão sequer raça humana, mas sim espécie humana.
Yes. But after you've said that, what happens to the Brazilian Indian? Does his children have equal opportunity to go to school? Do they get the same care? Or are they denied those opportunities because they are indigenous Indians of South America? Changing the term may be important to remind us that we are all one people. But at the same time, it's not an answer to that reality of discrimination that's going on. And the evil that we are fighting is the evil of discrimination. We're not fighting that you must give up your language, you must be ashamed of your culture, you must be ashamed of your color. No. We are fighting to say, be proud of who you are, but respect the other. Be proud of your language, but respect every language. Be proud of your color, but I'm not going to tell you who to fall in love with. That's your business. Right? So I think that's what we are grappling with. How to get unity as a human race, and how to get respect for diversity, understanding that the only true respect for diversity is that every person should have an equal opportunity in life.
Sabe o que eu acho difícil?
Também existe uma possibilidade de discutir isso de outro jeito. Se 20 anos atrás alguém me dissesse que hoje nós estaríamos discutindo religião como acontece hoje, eu acharia que essa pessoa estaria maluca. No entanto, hoje também existe esse preconceito da religião. Aqui, nessa televisão, uma vez eu coloquei uma notícia no ar e um erudito muçulmano me chamou a atenção. Por que você está falando em terrorismo islâmico? O terrorismo islâmico não existe, porque o Islã é contra qualquer forma de violência. Você não diz terrorismo protestante, católico, ou judeu, ou de qualquer outra forma. Por que você está se referindo a isso? Aí eu o chamei para cá e ele falou num programa nosso sobre esse tipo de discriminação, que hoje os fundamentalistas quase sempre são identificados com os islâmicos, mas existem fundamentalistas cristãos também, e judeus, etc. Como que a gente lida também com esse outro tipo de preconceito?
I think we are back to the same fundamental question, that in every religion, every ideology has the potential for fundamentalists to emerge because it is related to the exercise of power and the use of force. There are equally fundamentalist Catholics as there are Presbyterians and Protestants and Buddhists. So it's not a question that terrorism is inherent in a particular religion. Our real challenge is to ask, is that a political problem around which it has arisen, or is that a security problem? Usually those in power like to define any opposition as a security problem, and therefore they ignore a political solution. So, I would agree with you, but to the extent that I say diversity means the recognition of the difference and the legitimacy of every religion. In South Africa, we can say to our people that after 1994, there is no need for violence. Before 94, you didn't have the vote, so I couldn't tell you, don't do it that way. But now, when I see them demonstrating and using violence, I say to them, you're demonstrating, you got a grievance, you're right. But when you start killing people, destroying property, you're wrong. Because you now have all the other instruments to change the system. So that's where we are. And I think that it says one more thing repeatedly. Dialogue, dialogue, and more dialogue. And therefore, you've interrogated me, and that's part of the dialogue.
Essa questão que o senhor coloca com uma propriedade, uma clareza muito grande, ou seja, diferenças sem implicar em desigualdades, assimetrias, né? Eu acho que remetem um pouco a gente para a questão semântica do que significa apartheid, né? Porque racismos existem nas Áfricas como um todo, o Brasil, Estados Unidos, etc. O apartheid tem particularidades. Na verdade, ele segrega a sociedade por uma questão étnica, por uma questão racial, por uma questão linguística, às vezes por uma questão religiosa, pela própria visão que se tem do que é humanidade. Então, na verdade, ela perpassa a sociedade como um todo. E ela hierarquizou os mestiços entre si. E ela hierarquizou os negros no seu bloco. E também partiu, então, indianos, mestiços e os próprios brancos. Os brancos mais pobres, ou os portugueses imigrados, também eram discriminados. Então, é um sistema que eu acho que talvez, com algum exagero, mas a gente pode chamar de totalitário. É um sistema totalitário e que vai se construindo ao longo do tempo. Quando os senhores iniciam essa desconstrução e ela paulatinamente caminha até chegar ao governo de transição e depois à Comissão para a Verdade e Reconciliação, tratava-se do quê? De, além de unificar a sociedade, começar a inventar uma nação com alguma identidade comum, né? Como o senhor mesmo diz, a lei é importante, mas ela não basta, ela não dá conta desse cotidiano tão fragmentado, tão fracionado. Até o ponto que o senhor participou do governo e agora, indo à África do Sul, do que o senhor sabe, o que está sendo feito efetivamente, não só em termos das intenções do governo, em termos de política educacional e política cultural.
Só para acrescentar a isso, eu gostaria de saber, porque tem o chamado state of mind, né? Como as pessoas pensam. Então, eu imagino que depois de 350 anos, as pessoas não mudaram o jeito de pensar de uma hora para outra. Então, como é que se trata do governo, as escolas, onde agora vão negros e brancos, todos estudam juntos? Eu imagino que tem uma série de problemas também em relação a isso, na prática.
Again, let us be very proud of what we as humans have achieved. We have created educational systems which can help us to conquer the universe and travel to Saturn and Pluto. But at the same time, we have made everything such a narrow speciality that even a physicist is no longer as just a physicist. He or she is a particular type of physicist. And the result is that we have to begin to acknowledge that our educational system, while it has brought us this far, is not equipping our children to become citizens of the 21st century. That's a challenge we've got to face. I am part of that process at Bennington College. That's why I teach there. I'm not a teacher by profession. But we acknowledge that we are not producing the citizen of the 21st century. We are hoping to keep changing. But I know for myself, I have a very simple rule. And maybe when you simplify, you make big mistakes. But the simple rule is this. I'm not interested in what my children think. I'm interested in how they think. Because if they can learn how to think properly, we can always debate and argue and reason and arrive at a conclusion. But if they only are taught what to think, there is no debate. So that's the challenge, but it's not a new challenge in education. It's been recognized long ago. We just haven't found a way forward. And I think we have, it's one of the efforts that makes me interested in teaching at Bennington College. So, again, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer. I only have something to say, how can we put our minds together? How can we challenge each other? And how can we test whether we are getting the right result? Politicians, and that's why I retired after 5 years, politicians want you to judge them on their intentions. I think that's wrong. They must be judged on their outcome, not their intentions.
Professor, nosso tempo acabou. Eu queria agradecer muito a sua participação, dizer que certamente haveria outras questões e pontos a serem discutidos, mas a televisão é assim. Queria agradecer aos nossos entrevistadores, a você que está em casa e convidá-lo para estar aqui na próxima segunda-feira, 10h40 da noite, com mais um Roda Viva. Uma ótima semana e até lá.